Hey everybody, I just got back from seeing Wonder Woman 1984, and that is a total lie. I actually saw this movie almost 2 months ago, but I just never really kind of got the gumption to talk about it much, but I want to talk about it now. The main reason being because online this movie's kind of getting a bit of hate, which, not that it's totally unwarranted, but I don't think it's warranted nearly as much as some things may make you out to believe. So I'm just gonna talk about what I thought about the movie because there's a lot to talk about with this movie, like a lot. So the first thing I want to say is that this movie had a really awkward bit of serendipity because I saw this movie way back in January, January 7th, I think. And for those of you who remember the current event news, that was the weekend of, or the couple days when the U.S. Capitol building was, stormed by rioters. It was broken into. It was looted, which would be one thing, except there's a scene towards the last third of the movie where people are starting to storm Washington, D.C. and the Capitol building. The movie takes place in Washington, D.C. And I just was sitting there in the theater thinking, oh, this is awkward, isn't it? So there's that. Obviously, the filmmakers, they didn't know that was going to happen. They couldn't have predicted that, but there's a fun little side story in relation to the movie. And, before talking about this movie, I think I should talk a bit about my experience with Wonder Woman, which isn't a lot, but it's something. So the first Wonder Woman movie, I really like that movie. I think it's a really good, solid DC movie. Even going beyond DC, it's a good comic book movie. It's just a good movie in general. And when it came out, it kind of came out at the right time because, of course, DC movies were really, really pissing audiences off. With Batman v Superman, and a lot of their movies weren't doing that well. People thought they had too dark of a tone at the time, so the movie kind of came out at just the right point. But even taking that out of it, I think the movie would have done well pretty much any time it came out. It's a good movie. I like it. Aside from that, I really don't know much about Wonder Woman. I never really read the comics. I know her a little bit from the Justice League and the Justice League movies. I don't just mean the live action one. I mean like the animated DC verse. But I haven't seen the whole show. But from what I've seen, she's good. I've always really liked Wonder Woman in that sense. From what I've seen, I've liked her connection with Bruce Wayne Batman. They make a very nice team slash couple, depending on what phase of the story or the continuity they're dealing with. So I'd say I like Wonder Woman, but with that said, I'm really not that experienced or knowledgeable about the mythos or the history of Wonder Woman. So, and this movie, you need to be a little more versed in the comics, in my opinion. And maybe it's just me, I don't think a lot of Wonder Woman's villains and adversaries are all that iconic in the same way that, Batman or even Superman's villains are, because you can name like a million Batman villains, a million Superman villains. Not really that many Wonder Woman villains. I could be wrong. That's just my experience. So I'm saying that because this movie definitely feels more like a send up to some of the other comic book stories, which is fine. They're probably still good stories. But, just saying, if I get a few details wrong, I apologize. And I am going to go into spoilers, so if you don't want to know spoilers, skip this video, go see the movie. But if you don't care about spoilers, then I'll proceed. But my quick spoiler-free thoughts, what I think about the movie, I really liked it. I liked the movie. But with that said, I did like the movie. I don't know how many times I'll rewatch it in the future because this movie kind of has the same problem as Aquaman, and that it is really long. It's not quite Avengers Endgame length, where it's even 3 hours, but it is 2.5, and that's still pretty long as far as comic book movies are concerned for me. I mean, 2 hours it's getting there, but it's 2.5 hours, so yeah, it's a pretty long sit, and it's not just the fact that it's long, much like Aquaman, there's a ton going on. Like, there is a ton of story, which I'll get to in a bit, but there's a lot of story, and it's just really long. But I did like it. But there's a lot of issues with it also that I'm going to talk about in a bit. So the brief story I'll go over is that it's Diana, who now in 1984 is still more or less carrying the mantle of Wonder Woman while still trying to live her normal life as a... I don't know exactly what her job is, but she works at the Smithsonian Museum. She's a person who more or less helps to clean artifacts that come from places, and she cleans them up for the museum. Oh god, I lost where I'm going. Sorry about that. I kind of lost my place in the story because, again, it's been almost 2 months, so I'm forgetting some details, but don't worry, I've kind of got them back. So Diana, she works at the Smithsonian Museum doing what I don't exactly know, but things suddenly change when this villain named Max Lord, I think, he's played by Pedro Pascal, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who a lot of you might remember best as the Mandalorian from The Mandalorian, or I forget who he played on Game of Thrones, but you'll remember him from Game of Thrones as well, who right now is just on a real hot streak. Like, he is just getting huge role after huge role. Again, in any actor's career, some of those things might be like huge notes, but this man's been in some of the most successful television around. Game of Thrones, Mandalorian, he got a part in Wonder Woman. He's scheduled to be Joel in The Last of Us, which this guy's just on a roll, and I look forward to more of him. This guy's really cool. So he plays the villain named Max Lord, who's an oil tycoon who's not doing especially well. He made a lot of poor choices, but he comes across an item. I won't say what it is, but it's an item, and he uses this item to grant wishes. I'll go into more detail, but I'm just trying to give a quick overview. So he uses this item to grant wishes. Excuse me, sorry about that. And with every wish he grants, he obviously makes that person's life better, but every wish comes at a price. And one of these wishes indirectly results in Steve Trevor coming back, which again I'll get to. I'm sorry I'm saying this so much, but there's a lot of things I got to skim over first because this plot is so thick. But with more wishes that are granted, things get kind of worse and worse. It's the monkey's paw thing. Every wish you make takes something in return. So it's suddenly up to Diana Wonder Woman and Steve Trevor to stop Max Lord from pretty much ruining the world with this wish object. Now, with that said, that is the very, very bare bones abridged version of this story that I can give you, because outside of that, there is a ton that happens. Like, I'll say this. This movie is very much a film that is kind of split into two distinct parts. I don't mean like the first half's better than the second half or vice versa. But here, this is very much a story that is split between the hero and the villain in terms of which story is competing for your attention the most. And I'll say this. Everything that goes on with the villain, Max Lord's story, it's rare that I say this about any villain, let alone a comic book movie villain, but the way they handle his story in this film is brilliant. It is just brilliant. Like, every single thing about the story, about his character, from his backstory to how he handles himself, to the actor who plays him, to how he carries about his plan, to the consequences. It's like every single thing was just, it was thought about. They thought of ways to work around it, but it didn't feel like it was just loopholing. It felt like these were very genuine, organic ways that they could get to tell this story. And it's just done so well. I was shocked at how good they handled this character's story. And I almost wish the movie was just about him, which is odd sounding because everything surrounding Wonder Woman is not bad, but the problem with her story is that it's very unbalanced. Like, with Max Lord, you feel like they almost wrote his story first and then Wonder Woman second, because there's so much that they're trying to do, but it's just unbalanced. A lot of stuff happens, but it doesn't really give you time to kind of process what happens. Like, again, I'm I'm so worried this is going to be a trend in movies, because Rise of Skywalker did this too, where there's just so much exposition and so much stuff happening without really giving you a chance to breathe, which can work all right. I mean, Mad Max Fury Road to some extent did that, but even that movie let the characters breathe more. Like, there'd be these long half-hour segments of action, but then they would take the time to really slow down the pace and let the music build, or let the atmosphere just do its thing. This one, again, when it comes to Diana, does, but it also really doesn't. And it's just so hard to explain, but I'm going to give you some of the details about what I mean. So Max Lord, again, he runs this oil company, but he made a lot of really bad choices, so he purchased a lot of land that it turns out is totally useless, that there's just no oil there. But he's got, these huge ambitions, and then suddenly his creditors are coming and he's pushed to the limits. But his backup plan is that there's this stone, it's called a wish stone, which it turns out has been around for centuries, even millennia. It's this stone that can grant any person any one perfect wish. But of course, the downside, as I mentioned before, is that object. It's a veritable monkey's paw. With every wish it grants, it takes something from the wisher to negatively benefit them, and ultimately every civilization that this stone has come into contact to has collapsed. The Mayans, and I think the Incas were mentioned, were an example where they used this stone and they collapsed shortly after using it. Now, I won't say quite what he does, but Max, he comes into contact with this stone and he makes his wish. And the wish he makes, you're just thinking that was such a smart wish, because from this point on, there's kind of limitless possibilities, and this movie takes advantage of pretty much all of them. Every time he uses this stone, it affects him, but just the way it goes about it, it's so clever. Again, I can't stress enough how brilliant the villain's story is. But in addition to the stone, it's made better by the fact that, he's trying to connect with his son, but of course his ambitions keep getting in the way, and that's just so many driving forces. Just really great that way. And with Diana, again, she's just trying to kind of live her life, but suddenly Steve Trevor comes back. Now, this I will spoil, because I was really wondering, how are they going to bring back Steve Trevor? Because, like Chris Pine, because he died in the last movie. Now, what they do, it's kind of hard to explain, but basically, Chris Pine's soul, so to speak, is... Okay, first of all, Diana makes a wish that she wants Steve back. He was the person who meant the most to her in her life, and somehow the soul of Steve is, transferred into the body of this other guy. I don't know what connection he has. Maybe he's a descendant of Steve, but this other guy, so through some really clever camera work, Diana figures out it's him, because he says, you can save the world, but I can say today you can save the world. So from her point of view, she's seeing Chris Pine, but from our point of view, for the most part, we're sometimes seeing the other guy. I mean, they show Chris Pine mostly just to remind us that it's him, but that was really clever how they brought Chris Pine back. And so she has to take him around and show him how the modern world works, which is good, but again, it leads to a lot of problems. Like, for example, there's a scene where they have to fly a plane. The invisible jet comes into this movie, which is really cool, because that's arguably one of the most iconic things about Wonder Woman is the invisible jet. And the way they do it is kind of neat, but at the same time, there's things that just don't quite add up. For example, Steve can apparently fly modern aircraft, which doesn't make sense, but again, that's kind of comic book logic. I'm willing to buy it, honestly, for the... Excuse me, I'm sorry about that. I'm willing to buy that logic for the most part, but then she does something that turns the plane invisible and keeps it invisible to radar as well. And again, the plane is there, but they only really use it once, and it wasn't given a lot of build-up. It wasn't built up like, this is a thing. Aren't you excited, fans? They kind of show it, but then they just sort of abandon it at the same time. And it just doesn't make sense. So there's another scene later on where Diana, she renounced her well, I shouldn't have said that. That was a bad spoiler. But she renounces her wish pretty much, and she has to suddenly learn how to fly, which is really cool because I like the idea of Wonder Woman flying. I don't know if she did that a lot in the comics or the show, but she can fly now, which is a really cool scene. But in the span of a single scene, again, she just kind of takes to the air, has confidence, uses the lasso, and then suddenly she can like fly. And she doesn't really do it quite like Superman where she can just fly outright. It's more she has to like leap over tall buildings. But that's all done in the span of a single scene. And it's like, you really could have built up the fact that she needs to learn how to fly, because a whole part of her subplot also is that she's slowly like losing her power. She's losing her confidence in herself. And this could have really been a big moment, but it's more just kind of glanced over because it's making room for so many other plot points that are going on. One of which involves Kristen Wiig. Now, Kristen Wiig plays the character Cheetah. I mean, she's not called Cheetah outright. She becomes the Cheetah. And I'm only saying that I don't know much about Cheetah from the comics. I don't know really anything about her, but apparently she's one of the bigger baddies that Wonder Woman has had to face in those comics. So I know nothing about her backstory, but in this she's basically Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man 2 or something like that. She's a nerd, she's an outcast, and she wants to be seen, she wants to be loved. So she makes this wish. She makes the first wish to become, like Diana, like Wonder Woman, but it takes away what exactly? It doesn't really take away her. I think it's implied it takes away her morality because she kills someone later, but that's not really explored upon. So she makes this wish and then she becomes super strong, but they don't really go into what was taken from her. And then later on in the movie, she kind of wishes to become even more powerful, and then in doing so, it takes away her beauty, because after she makes that wish, she turns into the Cheetah and looks awful, by the way, like, God. But I don't really understand what they did with that. And on one hand, I get why she had to be here. She had to serve as the muscle, because Max Lord, despite his extreme power, he's not a very strong person, and it does take a lot before he kind of gains his ultimate power. But otherwise, you kind of could have cut the Cheetah out of this movie and not really missed much. And I don't think it really adds much to Diana's story, because Diana already had the subplot of not only trying to stop Max Lord, but also losing her power and just kind of needing to get over her own personal issues of doing what's best for the world. Which, I know I keep repeating myself, you just didn't need the Cheetah for this, because there's so much happening in this movie. And a lot of that comes from Max Lord, which, even though I said is brilliant, he also does lead to kind of a lot of the problems. So through the process of granting wishes surrogately, so to speak, he ends up creating wars between countries, natural disasters, almost ignites, mutually assured destruction between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the climax of this movie is really good, but it's also one of those things where there's just so much going on, which on one hand I really appreciate. I appreciate the fact that this movie is, it's sort of a middle chapter, so to speak. I mean, it's a sequel to Wonder Woman, but let's face it, it's kind of more or less filler until we get to some of the bigger DC movies, in my opinion. And I do like the fact it felt like a big event. It didn't just feel like this is like, a lot of the Marvel movies kind of do, where this is just filler to the next Avengers movie or to Infinity War or something. Like, no, this felt like a big event, but at the same time, I think maybe they did too much of an event. It's, and I would, which I wouldn't mind, but again, a lot of this movie is kind of undone by how unbalanced it is. Like, the tone of this movie is really unbalanced. So I'd say for maybe the first 30 minutes or so, the movie kind of is very reminiscent of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. So, the ones with Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker. They're kind of goofy. They're kind of silly. They're the action is fun. Like, they're fun. It's fun, but it just doesn't really feel like Wonder Woman. And I wouldn't mind that tone if, again, it was either in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie or if the whole movie was like it, which I guess could be fine, but then again, we're not taking it that seriously. It's just, Wonder Woman doesn't feel like the property where you should really be doing that. It's not that you have to be humorless, but the humor needed to be kind of better integrated into the plot, and this it really isn't. And then after that first half hour, it goes into the more serious tone. But with that said, there's also not an action scene for quite a while. There's an opening in the opening scene. It shows Diana as a child, and she takes part in this competition to show who's like the strongest Amazonian, which is fun. I saw this movie in D-Box, so it was kind of fun with the chair moving through all these things. But one, it's kind of pointless, and two, it just doesn't connect too much. I mean, that's the first action scene, and then we get one maybe 5 minutes after with her stopping a bank robbery. But then we don't get one again almost for 40 minutes or maybe longer. Now, to be fair, when the action does happen, it is very good action. It's a lot of, it's fun, it's engaging, it feels heavy, but there's just not a lot of it. And now, with that said, also, there is one thing that is kind of another bit of an imbalance, and that's sort of how Wonder Woman has managed to keep herself hidden for almost 100 years. Now, there's the scene where she's, preventing the bank robbery, and she's using her crown as a boomerang, which, okay, and she's like taking out security cameras, and she's really trying to use her speed to not be seen. But at the same time, you have to wonder, like, how has she not been seen? Like, there's a scene with a little girl, and she does this wink thing where, she, like, looks at the girl, does a wink, but then the girl goes, like, it's like, come on. Now, again, you could argue because it's all kept to DC that those are the only people, but there's just so much stuff that happens with Wonder Woman's involvement that you're kind of wondering, really, how has nobody seen this? Like, how has nobody seen this? This is impossible. Again, I'm willing to buy it a little bit because it's comic book logic, but it does push your suspension of disbelief just a little bit. I don't know. So with that said, you probably think that I'm really not a fan of this movie, which I said earlier, I am a fan. I really do like it. I think this is a good movie. But with that said, there are a lot of issues with it. Again, the tone is kind of imbalanced. Even though there's like a ton of things happening, but they don't give you a lot of time to absorb it, so a lot of it kind of goes over your head really quickly. And everything with Diana's story is okay, but it's not as interesting as I think the movie wants it to. Again, though, I do think it is kind of more or less made up with the villain, which is done so well. Now, with that said, I need to talk about one more thing about the villain. So the climax of this movie is that the villain, gets the president to make a wish, which was pretty cool, though at the same time, it's really questionable because he gets, like, close to the president. Like, I don't think you could get that close to the president. Even if the president tells his guards to, like, back down, it's okay. I don't think you could really get that close to him, and, like he holds his hands. Like, he takes his hands in his and, holds them. It's like, you couldn't get that close to the president, but I digress. And so the president wishes for more nukes, and Max Lord uses this to kind of get the president's authority, so like he can do whatever he wants now. Like, he has unlimited control, and he does this. He flies to an island where there's like a test satellite program. I think it's for like a broadcast. I don't remember what that thing is for, whether it's like for the weather or for broadcasting, but it's this satellite network that through, again, a lot of comic booky nonsense, kind of shoots particles down at the Earth and like can cover the entire expansion of the planet. So it's more or less like Max Lord is in contact with everyone, so therefore he's able to surrogately grant their wishes. And doing this, like, he grants billions of wishes at once. And he grants billions of wishes, and with that being said, he grants all these wishes, and things start to really go bad. Like, people want to be famous, but wars are starting. We're getting very, very close to mutually assured destruction. Wonder Woman is, like, beaten down. Like, she gets this she gets this armor that apparently was really important to the Amazonian people, but she only uses it in one action scene against Cheetah. And it looks cool, but again, you didn't need that in the movie, but I digress. So he's granted all these wishes. Wonder Woman can't stop him because he's just so powerful now. The lasso can't touch him. She can't stop him. But again, she kind of undoes what he does with the lasso by kind of wrapping it around him and showing the truth of what all these wishes are doing. And so people renounce their wishes. I should have said this earlier, I'm so sorry. But one of the stipulations with The Rock is that The Rock has to be, I think it's either The Rock has to be destroyed or everyone has to renounce their wish so that the society doesn't collapse. And so everyone seeing the damage that's being done renounces their wishes. Now the main problem a lot of people have with this climax is that Max Lord gets off scot-free. Like he renounces his wish and then he leaves the island, he goes to see his son, and that's kind of it. He doesn't get arrested, he doesn't get tried for his crimes, which, okay, I know in the real world that would be terrible. Like honestly, he probably should either go to jail for his life or like he should have things happen to him. Like, he did terrible things. But for the sake of the story and its message, I don't think it was that bad. Like, so many people are getting really mad that he just kind of got away with it. Which, yes, but at the same time, I'd argue his intentions were always so well-meaning, and he never did anything outright. No, that's not true. He did. I don't know. I just think that what happened was okay. It was okay that he kind of more or less got to be with his son and got to start his life over again. Whether or not he got arrested afterwards, I don't know, but I was okay with that. I personally thought that was fine. So, yeah, I'm really trying to think of what else to say. There's probably more to say, because again, there's just so much with this movie. But even though it is very unbalanced, there's a lot going on, and there are problems, I do recommend that you see the movie. I do think it is a movie that really deserves to be known about. I'll say this, it's certainly far from DC's worst films, I mean, God, but it's worth being seen. I don't know how many times I'll see it again, because even though I did like it, it was good, it is very long, and there's a lot happening. So, but I'd still see it. I think there's going to be a few things that most people can watch that can make them say, it was at least worth the price of admission. I enjoyed a lot of the action. The villain story was, again, very well done. Some of the stuff with Diana is okay, but there's one more thing. One more thing I just remembered. So the effects in this movie, for the most part, are pretty good, but there's some scenes in this movie that are really bad green screens. Like, there's a lot of scenes where Wonder Woman, she's running. Like, again, she's very fast. Now, it's one thing if the movie does it where they just kind of show a blur across the screen. That's one thing. But there's a lot of scenes where she's running, but they just have her against other people, and they don't track her right. So you see Wonder Woman, she's running, but she's only moving, like, that fast compared to all the people. So it looks like she's running on ice. Or when she's trying to learn how to fly, it's kind of obvious that they only had, Gal Gadot in a wind tunnel or something. Actually, not even that, because her hair's, like, barely flapping in the wind, even though she's, like, hundreds of feet in the air. And the green screen effect isn't that good, so it just looks ridiculous. So, yeah, I know this has been all over the place. I've been all over the place, but my general consensus, I do like the movie. I'll definitely see it again when it comes to Blu-ray, or maybe I'll even pay whatever it is for HBO Max to watch it again. But for those of you who haven't seen it, I definitely still check it out. It's a long watch, but I think there's a few things that you're gonna like. I don't think it's nearly as good as the first one. The first one was definitely a lot better paced. It had a lot more and kind of better action. It is a better movie. But this movie definitely doesn't deserve the hate it's getting. It's not perfect, but for so many people, I think, are going to kind of dismiss it. I don't think it deserves that. I think if this movie came out any other year, minus what's going on in the world, I think it would have done fine and got a better reputation. So, yeah, there it is. I might do a few more of these. Tell me if you like this, or if you just found it annoying listening to my voice for, I don't know, however long this is, like over 30 minutes. But until then, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.